Alors, rebonjour. Écoutez, j'espère que la pause déjeuner s'est bien passée, que vous avez pu profiter de la grande et riche gastronomie marocaine. Donc nous allons donc repartir vers, je vais inviter deux keynote speakers qui vont venir nous présenter des enjeux sur les thématiques qui sont encore au cœur de cette discussion qui a lieu actuellement à Marrakech au niveau de la COP 22. Alors comment ces thématiques sont reliées avec l'action d'Horyou? Je dirais que c'est l'une des caractéristiques des perspectives qu'Horyou offre en termes d'innovation sociale et de solidarité. C'est la volonté d'Horyou de toujours articuler, on va dire, nouvelles technologies, et spécifiquement la révolution Internet, et des mécanismes de solidarité beaucoup plus traditionnels, d'où cette plateforme qui permet de mettre en lumière l'action d'acteurs de terrain, des ONG spécifiquement, que vous avez pu voir déjà à l'entrée, et dont certaines sont ici avec nous. Je vais donc accueillir le premier intervenant qu'on a déjà pu entendre tout à l'heure. Son intervention touche un enjeu central de cette COP22, dont je disais, c'est la question des nouvelles solutions agricoles. Cette question se révèle particulièrement importante, et cette intervention est particulièrement importante, d'autant plus qu'elle va nous permettre de mieux comprendre les enjeux en termes d'innovation pour la production agricole, spécifiquement pour le continent africain. Donc je vous prie d'accueillir vraiment un expert marocain de tout premier plan sur la question des nouvelles solutions qui s'appuient sur les nouvelles technologies, le directeur de la MASNIR, M. Hicham Bouzekri, s'il vous plaît.
Bonjour. I'll probably do my speech in English. It's really a tough job because typically in our culture, after lunch, everyone goes for a small sleep. So I will try to do my best to keep your attention during these few minutes. Again, I would like to thank Horyou for this opportunity. I've spent a really great lunch with Leon Parienti, and we found many connecting points, and it probably symbolizes what Horyou is. You meet people that you typically don't see in your daily life, in your business lives, because you live in different spheres. So this great opportunity to meet people can only be realized by Horyou events, and I would like also to thank them for this opportunity. So coming back to the topic of innovative African agriculture, I will probably repeat a few numbers that you know already, but they set the stage for what we are trying to address as a problem. So the first one is that Africa has the biggest swaths of fertile land that is unused. So if you're looking for untapped resources, then Africa is the place. It's the only place that has over 200 million hectares of fertile land that could be used for agriculture, that is not used for agriculture. So this is a fact that everyone knows. The other one is that 25% of the African population suffers from hunger, which is a complete contradiction in itself, but it's World Bank numbers, and I think they are correct. The other aspect that is important is that the use of fertilizers, so 3% is the amount of fertilizer used in African agriculture, which is very, very small. It's the lowest in the whole world. So what we are seeing is the conjunction of contradictory aspects. Resources available, we know what the solutions are, but they are not used, and the consequence is hunger and low income for many farmers. Again, I will pick up some of the motto for Horyou, which is inspiring and hope. The hope is that there is a kind of a perfect storm that is being set up today in Africa. And that perfect storm comes from the fact that technology is making available resources and information that previously was unavailable or difficult to have. So this is completely new, and it changes completely I would say the opportunity. The economic opportunity of agriculture in Africa is estimated by the World Bank to be approximately $1 trillion by 2030. So this is a great opportunity for a country or for a continent that suffers most from poverty. So what we see is opportunities here, the problem is here, but we are not able to connect them in order to use these resources to solve those problems. So this is why I thought that talking about innovative African innovation is something very useful, because we have to think of the problem in a holistic way, not specifically technically telecommunications or IT, but you have to look at it from all perspectives. Other than the economic aspects of this problem, the social impact of agriculture in Africa cannot be underestimated. So if you look at the global continent numbers, 65% of the total labor force of Africa works in agriculture. Even in countries like Morocco that have had some success in industrializing its economy, so we've been able to attract very big actors like Renault, like Peugeot, like Boeing, but still, 40% of the Moroccan labor force still works in agriculture. So aside from the economic lost opportunity cost, there is a social impact that could be disastrous for African countries if nothing is done to really create wealth and create value from these opportunities in agriculture. So as I said, the opportunity that we have is the conjunction of many things. One of them is that technology is making information available. So I would like to give an actual concrete example. I am more of a hands-on person, so I'm not an economist. I use economist numbers just to illustrate the problem. But for example, the Moroccan Phosphates Office, which is l'OCP, l'Office Chérifien des Phosphates, has created a portal that makes available to a lot of the farmers all of the information they need in terms of fertilizer availability, weather forecasts, but also something that is very critical, which is how to sell your produce and where to sell it and what is the market price for what you're doing. This access of information is, to me, very interesting because it addresses a different approach. So in talking about innovative African agriculture, we could imagine what has happened in the Midwest in the US, where you have these huge tractors that are GPS controlled and that cover huge areas. I don't think that innovative African agriculture will be anything like that. And socially speaking, we have no interest that this innovative African agriculture be poor in job creation. What I think would be appropriate for the innovation in African agriculture is something that goes along more of social network, of enabling value creations for families. If you look at the example of a bad crop, a year where the yield is not very good, in a Western farm, this translates to lost opportunity and lost revenue for a corporation. In an African context, a bad crop year means destructions of families. It means immigration for the sons that will go to probably Europe or some of them to Morocco to work. And it creates irreplaceable ecosystems for this value creation. So we have to think of innovation as a way to keep this cell together. This connection between the Africans and the African land has to stay there for us to do anything that is sustainable. So in really trying to find how to connect the opportunity with the need, I think there is something that is quite unique. Technology has made so much progress today that we are able to provide highly intelligent systems to the African farmers where that they don't need to be fluent in technology to use it. In other words, we're looking for solutions that could be understood and used by the very simple farmer that does not need to know how IT works, does not need to know programming language, just interacts with it so the man-machine in African culture will be paramount for new technology and to use it to change their lives. This is not exactly what we are seeing. So a lot of the technological development, we're talking about cloud computing, we're talking about mobile phones. Most of the Africans, farmers, use mobile phones as a voice communication system. You could develop highly sophisticated applications. But the reality is that it will only make an impact if the person can relate to it. So what I'm calling for is, first of all, if we're going to change and develop and adopt an innovative African agriculture, first of all, it has to be people-centered. It cannot be technology-centered. And what we have seen is a lot of the people who are developing technology are actually doing it for the sake of technology, and then they are projecting it to the Africans and say, see how you can use it. I think it should be the other way around. We, myself included, are engineers and we love technology. The risk is that you could develop something that will have zero impact on the field because it does not, the person who is going to use it does not relate to it. We should start by making the farmer center of all of the technological developments that we would like to do, and then work upward. See what makes sense for him. See what are his needs. And we are trying to do some of that. The OCP, which is a member of our foundation, has created really a continental reach so that we could understand the needs of the Africans and work from there to a technology, and if it has to be developed, we can develop it. So to give you just a small example, and maybe I'll conclude on that. I would say the technology, I think it's Steve Jobs that said something like that, simple is beautiful. When you end up with technology that has technology for its own sake, then the risk is that it's going to be ignored by the majority of farmers. So the example that we've detected is that when you look at how to improve the yield of farms, fertilizer is central. So I know it's politically correct to talk about bioagriculture and talk about the not using chemical fertilizer, but the reality is that there is hunger, and the biopesticides and biofertilizers will not replace. At best, they are good complements to chemical fertilizers. So at best, we should be able to have a good balance in order to achieve the wealth creation that will keep the African farmer families in their place. So I know we're not seeking the politically correct. So one of the topics is, how do you know how much fertilizer do I need? So what we have developed, and we are still testing, is a standalone fertility evaluator, which is an electronic basis that you can do right there on the spot. And the man-machine interface is designed around the African farmer understanding. So you ask him, what are the questions? What are the sequence of questions that you ask? And you make those the goal of your IT design, not the other way around. And so I believe all of these technologies, from a holistic perspective, will change the way African agriculture is working. I think the fact of being in Africa gives us an insight into what technology will make sense. Ultimately, it has to make economic sense on top of technology sense. So probably I'll stop there. I was asked to talk for 10 minutes. I could talk for hours, but I'd like to respect other speakers. Those who have slept, please wake up. It's done, and I'll keep it at that. Thank you very much.
Notre prochaine intervenante compte parmi les femmes les plus influentes dans le monde scientifique, dans le Proche et le Moyen-Orient. Sa grande connaissance des enjeux de la recherche scientifique autour des questions agricoles, mais aussi sa maîtrise des mécanismes d'intégration de ces questions dans les politiques publiques, nous permettront véritablement de nourrir notre réflexion sur l'importance des solutions agricoles innovantes. Je vous invite à accueillir Madame Imane El-Kafi.
So good afternoon, everybody. They're just looking for my presentation, so it shouldn't be very long. It's on? Okay. So I'm sorry, there will be a little bit of repetition with Hisham. I'll try to skip some of the slides. How do I move it, guys? Is that a clicker, or somebody would click it for me? Or? Thank you very much. So I'm the Director General of the International Center of Biosaline Agriculture, and it's a center that's based in Dubai, and we do research in marginal environments. So I wouldn't talk so much about ICBA, but I want to give you a little bit perspective from Africa, and many of the numbers, Hisham said them. So if we look at Africa, unfortunately, the growth of the population, it's rising a lot. So if you look at the numbers, about 10 billion by 2050 or 9.7 of 2050, most of it's gonna come from Africa. So the population of Africa by 2050 gonna double. We do have right now beyond 200 million of people that are malnourished and hunger. So it's not only poverty, it's not hunger, it's also malnutrition, which is a different aspect that we haven't looked at in the MDGs, in the Millennium Development Goals. So if you look at the gap of how much we need, we imported about 20 million tons of grains in general, and Africa got about 4 million in 2000. This is the number from 2013. So what it says is that it's, as a continent, we need more. We are bringing from outside and not producing enough. So what are the challenges for agriculture? Why we are not self-sufficient? Why we are not part of the economy when it talks about agriculture? It's because, as Hisham said, it's one of the continents that use the less fertilizer ever. So we are a continent that we are not using technologies yet, so we don't have enough machinery, we are not using seeds or improved seeds, and again, we are a continent that are not using fertilizer, so there isn't enough input. And beyond that also, we don't have irrigation. So irrigation in Africa, it's about 7% of the land under irrigation, it's irrigated in Africa. Most of it are in countries like Morocco. Whereas if you compare it with Asia, about 48% of the agricultural land is irrigated. So you see a difference between two continents. The other thing we have, it's really infrastructure. So we have a huge infrastructure problem. So not only we have remote areas where people, they can't have access to finance, they can't have access to the input, as we said, fertilizer and seeds, but also we are in a place where it's very hard to move stuff. So either in the input or in the output area. So what will happen in the future? If we add to all these challenges the climate change, we all know that we have agreed in Paris to initiative and changes to reduce it to 20%. If you look at the map of Africa, you see that Africa will be one of the hottest and the driest area. So you can't generalize. We have different ecosystems in Africa. Not all of them gonna become hot, not all of them gonna be dried, but in general, if you look at the whole planet, or at the whole planet that you look at Africa, you see that we got a lot of stresses there. We will be hotter and drier in general, and with that, one of the areas that we will have the most problem with, it's water. So we will have more problems with water. Most of the countries gonna be in the group of people that live with the water stress. And also, what it says is that as the temperature rise, many of the countries that are producing staple crops right now, they're gonna have a reduction in their yield. So countries that are producing maize, wheat, unless they breed different species or different varieties from maize and wheat, they will have a reduction about 50% of their yield. So what's the solution? And that's what I want to get into innovation. So the context, I think, doesn't need more details. It's quite not very rosy. However, there are innovation. As Hisham said, there are a lot of technologies out there that could help us. So what I will try to focus in the next few minutes is few innovation along the value chain or along the different areas of agriculture. So under water, it's irrigation. As I said, only about 7% of Africa agricultural land is under irrigation. There is a lot of innovations there. We tend to go with very big schemes irrigation, like huge dams and huge irrigation system, which is very, very, very expensive. And that's where the World Bank money comes, that's where the African Development Bank comes, and so on and so forth. But there are technologies which we call the small-scale irrigation technologies, which are not very expensive, which are not very complicated, and some of them, most of them, has to be at a community level. So this is one of the innovations that we should look at. There was a huge program by Feed the Future on small-scale irrigation. There's a big program by the Islamic Development Bank in the Sahel looking at different technologies. We, as ICBA, did a lot of research in the Sahel as well to look at what are the best technologies there. So there is a huge component. We could easily multiply the productivity by 3 right now if we include the small-scale irrigation in many of the existing agricultural land. And with the irrigation, the small-scale irrigation, what we are doing, you are increasing water use efficiency, and you are reducing the risk to the farmers. The second innovation is on the seeds. Most of the seeds in Africa goes through an unofficial market chain. And many of the varieties that farmers like, that people like in many crops, from manioc to teff to many others, they don't find them in the market. So it's a huge area where we need private sector. It's not a government job to do seed production. They could be a facilitator, they could be a helper to establish the system, but we need private sector to really develop the varieties, or at least multiply the varieties that are developed by the national programs to make them available for the farmers. I would like here to cite the example of India. India 15 years ago has 0 private sector for seed. So it was mostly the multinational DuPont and Syngenta and what have you that used to sell seeds in India. Look at it now. They have over 200 seed companies. Some of them got very, very big. So it's amazing how seed sector could help big time the farmers with the right varieties for them. Fertilizer, Hisham covered very well a part of it. For Africa, most of the soils are very old. So the continent, it's one of the oldest continents. So the soils, by default, are pretty old, very low organic material, but many of them have micronutrients that we wouldn't think of, selenium, magnesium, and others. So when you go into fertility mapping, like OCP did with Morocco, for Morocco, they are doing it now in Ethiopia, they are doing it in many Sahel countries as well, that you got really a close-up. You understand exactly what, if you are producing veggie or producing a grain or quinoa, what kind of fertilizer you need to add to your soil. And that could really increase the productivity big time. The other innovation is machinery. If you look at the machinery and the number of machinery we have in Africa, in comparison with the other continent, it's really horrific. We need at least about 7 to 10 times more. But the question is, what kind of machinery do we need? Do we need to go with the big scheme and we're going to create a huge farm system like in Australia or like in Canada? Or we want to preserve our smallholder and help them produce with a different system? So I would argue that the kind of machinery we need, it's much more small machinery that is fitting the 2-hectare or 5-hectare farming system that we have. And here, again, the technology, it's not in Europe, it's not in the US, the technology is mostly in Korea, it's mostly in the Asian countries. And that's really where we have to tap and look at. The other innovation I want to talk about is crop diversification. And here really what I want to really emphasize here is that if Africa gonna produce as much as the potential is Africa gonna use the untapped land that my colleague mentioned? Do we wanna go with the same crops? Do we wanna continue producing the same cereals, wheat, maize, and rice, or we wanna grow other things? If you look at the nutrition, and now we have a huge malnutrition, shouldn't we think about biodiversity? Shouldn't we think about what the communities want, what the community have been living on, where we have crops that are native to those communities and those regions, and help them develop further, create value chain for them, create new end product from them. So I hope for me, Africa is absolutely the savior of the world. It's the only place where we can produce more, no doubt about it. It's the only place where we have still land, we still have water, we still have people as well, and very, very young population that could work very hard. And it's rising very nicely finally. So, but do we gonna go with the globalization the way it is, or we wanna create different things? We wanna create a world where it's diversified. We don't have only 2 parties or 3 crops or what have you. And here really when I talk about diversification, for me it's diversification in crops, but it's diversification in everything, in languages, in communities, in practices, in cultures. So really diversification, I hope that Africa gonna do it right and gonna open up space for several small seed companies to show up, breeders to develop crops that people wanna use and keep it and take it to the market. So the way forward for me, I like very much the green plan of Morocco. So I called it a green plan for Africa. Somewhere where you're gonna develop that you have to have a climate smart agriculture. So you want an agriculture with the lowest input you can have. So although we're saying they're not using enough fertilizer, we don't wanna use too much. We don't wanna end up with contamination of magnesium or of nitrogen in our aquifera. And a green plan where you have diversified crop and cropping system and make Africa self-sufficient, but also an exporter to the world. With that, it comes a big gap of policies. I didn't talk about policies because I tried to focus on innovative technologies, but the policies has to come along. And those policies covers from the land tenure to the access to the water, access to finance, access to facilitation, and what have you. So we do have really to look at better policies that could really support Africa agriculture development. Better trade agreement, absolutely. As you are producing more and we are rising in the market, you better have work on your international trade agreement, but also think about trading within the countries within Africa. And lastly, have new innovation that suit Africa. So when we get new technologies, whatever it is, we have to customize it to the farmers here. So it has to go through a time period or an essay and trials to make sure that is the right innovative technology for Africa. So with this, I'll close, and thank you very much.
Alors, nous allons donc démarrer le premier panel. Ce premier panel, on se souviendra que lors de la COP 21, beaucoup de pays africains avaient plaidé pour une agriculture respectueuse de l'environnement. Et ce panel-ci va donc nous permettre de prendre connaissance des dernières innovations éco-sensibles intervenues dans le monde agricole.
I would like to call Mr. André Liu, President of IFON Organics International. Mr. Ronnie Cummins, co-founder Organic Consumers Association. Mr. Eric Chavez, founder of Oikos.